feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong, in my happy place. I got my head held high, I'm on my way, and I'm following the signs to my happy place. I'm walking in the light of a brand new day, and I'm right where I belong, in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong, in my happy place. And I'm right where I belong, in my happy place.
Hi, thanks for joining us and welcome to the National University of Singapore Yonglulin School of Medicine's Healthy Longevity webinar. We have an exciting discussion ahead tonight. I want to remind you to use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we have Wei-Han here who will take those questions and pass them on to Nolen. Nolen Gertz will be our guest tonight, but before we get to him, we're going to have a short presentation by Viresh Sukumar, who's one of a PhD students in our Healthy Longevity Translational Research Program, talking about mitohormesis.
Thanks for the kind introduction. And as mentioned, my name is Viresh. Welcome to my talk on mitohormesis, the mitochondrial stress response. So let's start off with something that most people are familiar with, and that is inflammation. Inflammation is an important aspect of our physiology, but it often comes with a negative connotation. Exercise and diabetes are both inflammatory. So then why is one encouraged while the other considered undesirable? Well, that's because a small amount of acute inflammation, like in the case of exercise, increases our tolerance of inflammation. But chronic and excessive inflammation, like in diabetes, can be problematic. And in fact, cancer and aging are also inflammatory. So at the molecular level, inflammation introduces reactive oxygen species, or ROS, into the mitochondria, which is the power plant of our cells. In excessive amounts, ROS can cause mitochondria damage and dysfunction. But in small amounts, the mitochondria is able to acquire tolerance. Now, this ability to adapt is known as mitohormesis. And the two windows of mitohormesis dictate whether the response to ROS will be positive or negative. Targeting the first window will introduce resistance to subsequent inflammation, while targeting the second window will promote inflammation. So essentially, the shape of the curve is a function of the mitochondrial response. So coming back to our first question, if they are both inflammatory, then why is exercise encouraged but diabetes undesirable? Well, that's because exercise promotes mitochondrial efficiency through mitohormesis, but diabetes is a state of mitochondrial inefficiency. So exercise provides small amounts of ROS to the mitochondria so that they can adapt and gain tolerance. Diabetes instead is a state of chronic inflammation where the mitochondria is overwhelmed with ROS. So our lab actually focuses on using magnetic fields as a means to induce mitohormesis in various cell types for desired effects. So for example, we have shown that our fields can promote myogenesis or the growth of muscle cells through mitohormesis. And on the other hand, we have also shown that our fields can induce cell death in cancer cells by inducing metabolic catastrophe. So we are able to achieve these two drastically different results using the same tool, and simply by understanding and targeting the two windows involved in mitohormesis. So my work focuses on macrophages, and macrophages are immune cells that can both kill cancer cells, but also help them grow, and it's all dependent on the state of the macrophage. So the state of the macrophage itself is dependent on the metabolic pathway of the macrophage, which is closely linked to mitochondrial function. And in fact, the cancer-killing macrophages usually exhibit mitochondrial inefficiency as one of their hallmarks. So for killing of cancer cells, macrophages need to be pro-inflammatory. But cancer cells often secrete molecules that suppress the inflammatory features of macrophages to support their growth. Now, if you recall, I started this talk by saying inflammation is an important aspect of our physiology, right? So this is one such example where we want the macrophages within the tumor to be inflamed. And we aim to accomplish this through their mitochondria. Using our magnetic fields, we can bombard the mitochondria to produce ROS, which can then push the macrophages into an inflammatory state. By targeting the second window, we can make macrophages more inflammatory. Now, this may be undesirable in a general context, but in the context of cancer, this would be highly beneficial. And when we tested this in the lab, we saw that exposing macrophages to magnetic fields promoted an inflammatory response. We observed this effect in naive and untreated macrophages, and remarkably, we also found this to be true in macrophages that typically help tumor growth. So our fields are able to do this without affecting the surrounding healthy tissue, which is more resistant to ROS. We hope to pair our magnetic fields with chemotherapy to reduce the dose and the number of treatments of chemo. Ultimately, we hope inclusion of our magnetic therapy will improve the quality of life and health span of patients. Now, while my work revolves around macrophages in cancer, the science behind it can still apply to aging and inflammation. I have focused on using the second window of mitohormesis to promote inflammation in macrophages within tumors. By using the same magnetic fields, we can also target the first window to induce tolerance and promote long-term anti-inflammatory properties. Like the example of exercise, we can train macrophages to be more resistant to inflammation by introducing small amounts of inflammation through our fields. Now, doing this could have important implications on cardiovascular diseases and diabetes, where pro-inflammatory macrophages are a key player in the progression of those diseases. So I would like to thank my thesis advisor, Prof. Alfredo, my mentor, Dr. Tai, the Biceps Lab, and iHealth Tech for supporting my work. And thank you all for your time and attention today. If you'd like to catch a glimpse of the other interesting projects that we are working on, please feel free to follow our lab on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you.
Thank you, Viresh. So I'm excited. We're going to go into a little bit of a different area tonight. Should be interesting. We have Nolen Gertz, who's an assistant professor of applied philosophy at the University of Twente and the author of The Philosophy of War, as well as Exile, Nihilism, and Technology. His work investigates the role technologies play in everyday life and is primarily focused on areas of political philosophy, philosophy of technology, and existential phenomenology. The topic of his talk tonight is the technological mediation of health. Thanks for joining us, Nolen.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. So yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to 226 of you in the audience. So I'm sorry I cannot see you. I'll just assume that you're clapping throughout. So yes, I'm Nolen Gertz, assistant professor of applied philosophy at the University of Twente. As you can see here, I've written a book, Nihilism and Technology. So I'm going to try to summarize it for you as quickly as possible in only the 20 minutes I have. And if it doesn't make sense, you can buy the book. If it does make sense, you can also buy the book. Either way. So first of all, since I am a philosopher, I like to start with easy questions like, what is technology? Now, we typically have something like 3 different perspectives. We tend to think either that technology is dangerous, it's deterministic, it's making the world worse and worse. On the other hand, we say that technology is great, it's freeing us up to do what we've always wanted to do, it's utopian and making the world better and better. And then in the middle, you find the instrumentalists, the people who say technology can't actually make us do anything. It can't make the world worse or better. This is a category mistake. It's really just a means to an end. And if life is getting better or worse, that's humans, not the technology. Now, of course, if you are given 3 options from a philosophy professor, the answer has to be the 4th option. So I'm going to introduce very quickly one of the ugliest words we've come up with, post-phenomenology. I apologize for my interest in Photoshop. So this is the famous duck rabbit that I've turned into the matrix. But the idea here, much like the duck rabbit, Technology is not good, it's not bad, it is good, it is bad, it's all of the above, none of the above. This is what it means to be multi-stable. That we cannot describe a technology outside of its specific use, outside of a specific context, outside of a specific user. So we cannot have any sort of capital T technology claims, only talk about technologies. So because of this, unlike our traditional way of thinking about subject-object dualism, again, as I mentioned earlier, this idea from the instrumental perspective, humans act, objects are acted upon. Post-phenomenology says, actually, this is not how technology and humans interact with each other. In fact, we co-constitute each other. So, for example, as a father, I often find myself telling my son he's using his fork wrong. But as a philosopher of technology, I have to say I respect how you answer the call of the fork. So this idea that a fork isn't for any specific purpose, it's how you use it, right? And in each time you use it, either as a utensil in a meal, as a toy in a game, as a weapon in a murder, it also is constituting you as an eater, a player, or a murderer. So this is what it means to talk about co-constitution. So Don Eide, the philosopher of technology who gave us this way of thinking, says that there is a variety of human-technology relations. He focuses on 4 specifically. So right now, for example, I'm engaging in embodiment relations. I'm wearing a pair of glasses. And I say that I'm seeing the screen in front of me, but really I'm seeing my glasses seeing the screen. So it's important that my glasses become part of my embodied schema, so that I just, don't even think about them. I just say, I'm looking at you, I'm seeing you. But the glasses are actively shaping how I perceive the world, and the longer I use them, the more dependent on them I become. So when my son broke my glasses recently, I discovered that I'm effectively blind without them. And as I discover every year when I have to get new glasses, they're actually making my eyes worse, not better. Hermeneutic relations. This is when the technology is on the side of the world. So for example, you might say right now that you're hearing me talk, but really this is a Zoom world relationship. So you're only getting from me what Zoom lets you see of me. But again, you would say to people probably not you heard Zoom hear me, but rather that you heard me talk. In the same way, when Donald Trump talked about fake news, again, we talked about news on Facebook, news on Twitter, but we just talk about the news and forget about how Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or whatever can actually shape the news itself. Alterity relations, this is when I'm actually focused on the technology to the exclusion of the world. On the other hand, background relations, the one that we're most familiar with, but probably think least about. If you think about, you enter a room, you take for granted there'll be lighting, there'll be air. Now you probably take for granted there'll be Wi-Fi. So this is actually how we relate to the world, thinking that this is just natural when really this is technologically informed. So why does this matter? Well, according to Don Eide, what this shows us is importantly that technologies are non-neutral. So the instrumental perspective is simply wrong. More importantly, it reveals that our relationship to technology is all about revealing and concealing. So at the same time that I want technology to make my life better, it only works to the extent that basically I don't think about the technology. And the more I have to think about the technology, the less it works, right? So if I have to take my glasses off to clean them, there's something not working. If I have to look down at a video game controller when I'm playing, I'm going to die. So this is the revealing concealing dynamic. Don Eide talks about how this functions as operating on a sort of continuum where technologies could be sort of a part of me, or they could be like an other opposing me. So in each of the relations we've talked about, especially these 3, you can see this dynamic of revealing and concealing playing out. So the technology of glasses reveal, how I can see the world better, and feels like it's empowering me. But again, it conceals the degree to which it belittles me, like I said, that I become dependent on the glasses to see. Hermeneutic relations, I get to learn about the world, experience the world. You get to talk to me and I get to talk to you, but we're not in the same room. So there's a projection element here. But at the same time, for all you know, this is a recording and I'm on a beach somewhere. So again, you have faith that this is really happening, but you have no independent confirmation. Alterity relation, we are fascinated by technology. We have a robot in a city center here at Enschede. It's the first thing you see when you get off the train. But at the same time, we feel a little afraid of robots. We feel a little afraid of AI. You might have heard this whole, are they all coming to kill us idea. So as much as we're fascinated, we're also kind of terrified. So what does this all reveal? This reveals that, again, our traditional ways of thinking about technology are wrong. Technologies are not merely means to human ends, but rather they mediate how we see the world and they mediate how we act in the world. So what does this have to do with health? As you can see, historically up to the present, we've had an interesting relationship to how we think of the body and how we think of technology. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the time. So my former colleague, Peter Paul Verbeek, adopted post-phenomenology and said that, if technologies shape how we see and act, then they also shape how ethical life functions. So we can talk about not only how technologies do shape our actions, but also how they should shape our actions. So instead of our traditional ethical ways of talking, what should I do? From the mediational perspective, we actually have to think about, again, this human technology relationship as the unit. So what should I, technology, do? Should be the new kind of ways of talking about technological ethics. Langdon Winner pointed this out most recently in 1980 in his famous paper about the Long Island Expressway, and the idea that the builder, Robert Moses, was basically able to put his racist views into the bridge itself, so that by lowering the expressway overpasses such that public buses could not go through, buses which in the United States typically are used by minorities, used by people who are poor, they were able to effectively keep people out of certain areas. This was a road going to a beach where rich people live. Without having to say anything, you could just build the prejudice right into the technology. Similarly, Cynthia Cockburn and Susan Ormrod talked about the microwave. As you probably noticed, if you ever looked at a microwave, it has these weird little buttons for popcorn, for frozen pizza. And what's interesting is that originally this was designed as high-tech military technology aimed at men with engineering backgrounds, but they were discovering that it was actually being bought by housewives. And so they decided, well, then we have to dumb it down because women can't possibly understand the math and science involved. So you can build sexism into products as well, and you would not necessarily even have any idea about it. Again, if you think about obstetric technology, if you think about an ultrasound, how this shapes not only our relationship to a fetus, but also shapes the relationship dynamics between father and mother, about being able to make decisions. This gives rise to new concerns concerning things like abortion decisions. So again, just the act of introducing a new medical technology reshapes our ethical and political thinking about childbirth. Of course, my favorite, if you've worn a Fitbit, you have this idea of the technology telling you to get up and move. Apple said, let's take that one step further. I can make a Fitbit for your soul. So I can give you meditation points, and you can competitively meditate with your friends on the Apple Breathe app. This has led to a revolution in wearable technology and healthcare, and this idea of, why don't we just wear devices all the time that constantly tell you, all these statistics, and increasingly giving you this idea of health as quantitative and as something that you should be sharing with your doctor basically 24/7. Of course, we've also done this in other ways. Lighting design, for example, here in the Netherlands, we have Philips Eindhoven. They started going around to companies and saying, the science of lighting can be used to make a more productive workplace. Productive, of course, being equivalent to health and happiness for some reason. Might have something to do with capitalist society. But again, the idea this is so successful that this became, why don't you do it to yourself at home? So Philips Hue is being released as, again, a way to basically be your own boss and manipulate your own mood with an app. Facebook has been experimenting with trying to use predictive algorithms to determine if people are happy or sad on Facebook, with the ultimate desire that if they think you might be suicidal and might kill yourself using Facebook Live, which some people were doing, well, then why don't they predict that this might happen and just call 911 for you? Of course, recently, you might remember there was this little thing called a pandemic. And again, this idea of why don't we use facial recognition software and algorithms in order to try to predict who's got coronavirus. And this idea of surveillance technology being repurposed as health technology, which, of course, if you've ever read Michel Foucault, isn't a new idea, but actually goes back about 1,000 years. More recently, we've been getting more and more increasingly concerned with this idea of how we could use technology not only to make ourselves healthier, but even live longer. So again, what we're talking about today, and as you can see in these numbers at the bottom, 70% of people say they'll wear wearables because they think that it'll help them to live longer. So, is technologically mediated health itself healthy? What does it mean to try to use technologies to extend your life and to be healthy? Ian Hacking, a famous philosopher of science in Canada in 2007, warned that technology and technological progress was basically bringing Descartes' mind-body dualism back into everyday life. This idea that we could basically tinker with the body technologically and upgrade it using technology, and that the soul would therefore finally get the immortality that we were promised. This has led to a revolution in what has come to be known as transhumanism, which is basically the religion that started in Silicon Valley and started to take over the world. This leads to people like Kevin Warwick and this idea of trying to turn yourself into a cyborg. That's a picture of him there. And he writes in this paper in 2003 about what does it mean to be the world's first cyborg. Shouldn't everyone have the right to become a cyborg? In fact, if you didn't become a cyborg, wouldn't that basically make you an ape in relation to humans? Nick Bostrom, who is an Oxford professor and the ethicist for Google's DeepMind project, similarly argues that we should invoke these two freedoms, morphological freedom and reproductive freedom, so that everyone can use technology to make their lives better and also make their children's life better even before they're born. So this is why they're embracing this Nietzschean idea. They agree that God is dead, so let's do it ourselves. Isn't this what Nietzsche wanted? So Bostrom argues that technology will allow us to finally free ourselves from the curse of nature, the horrors of nature in general, of our own nature in particular. And he gives this fun list of these kinds of things that technology would finally cure, which, if you actually start to think about it, when you see something like cheating on a list of natural evils, you might start to wonder if any of these are actually natural. And if really he's all that Nietzschean, is he saying that which does not kill me makes me stronger like Nietzsche did? I argue no. It's quite the opposite, that it reveals a weakness to be cured technologically. So we're not in God is dead territory with Nietzsche. We're actually in, no, we have a new God, let's call it technology. What Nietzsche actually warned about was precisely transhumanism. This idea, what Nietzsche famously is known for with nihilism, this idea that we are desperate to avoid suffering at all costs, even if it actually ruins our life in the process. In other words, again, ask your doctor if mind-body dualism is right for you. So going back to hacking, the worry here is that in experimenting on our bodies in order to achieve longer life at all costs, we're basically creating eugenics and the vision of Brave New World that we were warned about by Aldous Huxley. But Bostrom says, don't worry. If you think Brave New World was a dystopian technology world, you're misunderstanding it. It's really about who's in control, not about technology. Now, Bostrom is an Oxford professor, so of course I felt like he must be right, but I thought maybe I should just read the book just in case. And actually, if you read it, you find out Huxley is pretty clear. Trying to avoid suffering at all costs is actually not the right way to live. And this is, sorry, spoiler alert, this is how the book ends. So similar to Nietzsche, that rather than avoid suffering, actually suffering is part of life. This is something we should embrace, and trying to avoid suffering is avoiding life. So again, this idea that what the priests do is they try to offer us magic cures to the very suffering that they're helping us to experience, because they tell us that suffering is bad. So this is my attempt to schematize a few hundred pages of Nietzsche for you. And again, this idea that what the priests offer us as medicine is basically nihilism. So this idea, drink yourself into a stupor, do whatever your boss tells you, do mechanical activity, try to find pleasure of helping others because it makes you feel more powerful than they are. Join into a herd, don't have to think for yourself, just go with the flow. And of course, every once in a while, you explode in an orgy of violence or happiness, depending on whatever country you're in. Here in the Netherlands, we have Koningsdag for that. So my book, I argue that this is also the structure of how tech companies are working today. And that basically they're offering us the same cures of Christian priests, according to Nietzsche, but now in a new technological version of this. So for today, what we're talking about here with longevity, again, this idea, let's live forever in the metaverse. This is Zuckerberg's vision of living forever. Or again, the idea of transhumanism, let's just replace the body with a new body. So the Bostrom vision is, of course, this idea that if you think nature is good, then you are a bioconservative. Whereas transhumanists argue that, they're the liberators who see the flaw of nature. Now, what's interesting is once you argue that you should use technology to create a new nature, you run into the problem, of course, that you're going to start to think that new nature is also flawed. And you're going to be in basically a never-ending struggle against flaws, also known as what I call nihilism 2.0. So Nietzsche warned us, of course, about this, that even though we've killed God, we're going to bring him back over and over again. And that I argue that this is what technologies are doing, that by making us see life's problems as solvable by technology, they help us to see life itself as a problem to be solved by technology. Now, this is where my book ended. What I'm currently working on is trying to move past this to not just here's what's wrong, but some kind of a solution. I say I have 10 seconds left, so I'll try to sum up real quick the philosophy of Simone de Beauvoir. So like Nietzsche, she's similarly worried about technology and the idea that it was giving us this false fantasy of making our lives better. And I argue that this helps us to think of a new way of thinking about the ethics and politics of technology, where rather than embracing this fantasy of greater efficiency, comfort, luxury, and happiness, that instead technology can be ethical if it helps us to actually see the world better, to become more aware of what our real possibilities for freedom are, to become less complacent and less oppressed by the fantasies we're sold by capitalism. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I want to start it by saying that we're out of my league. I've read Nietzsche and a few of the others you mentioned, but so I'm going to do my best and ask as few naive questions as possible. I did want to bring out you mentioned Robert Moses. I mean, there's a book called The Power Broker, if people are interested, that describes the life of Robert Moses. It's about 1,100 pages, and I think it says an amazing amount about Robert Moses, and perhaps even more about the person who went into all that depth to write the biography. But if you want to get American politics at its maybe most powerful and possibly worse, it's a good book to read. so I'll put in a plug. So, I was thinking about what you're saying about, technology but we're limited by nature in the physical world, right? Before technology came along, while we were walking around, there were things we could see, there were things we couldn't see. Technology is also limited by nature. So is it really fundamentally changing anything, or just altering how we perceive things? Maybe you answered that question already, but I didn't. I was stuck on that while you were talking. So.
Yeah, thanks. Now, the idea that technology, so the Don Idy argument that technology basically always comes between us and the world, and that for Idy, this isn't new, this is how humans have always been. So this idea that we're technological beings living in a technological world, and that we should not think about humans versus technology, because that misunderstands, again, that humans are who we are through technology. Mm-hmm. So this idea then that we see the world as shaped by the technologies around us, and that what we think of reality, so he talks about this idea of, what would an unmediated experience be? That again, this is something like a fantasy going back to the Garden of Eden, right? That this would be some sort of pre-fall way of thinking, because in the world we live in, that's just not possible. That we are always going to be surrounded by technology. So even if you say, like, I'm going to take a vacation from my devices, I'm going to go into the woods. Already your conception of nature is shaped as not technology. So you're even defining the woods as in opposition to technology. But that even if you're not carrying your device, you're probably thinking about, how beautiful things are. This would be a great Instagram post. I can't wait till I get back and I can tweet about my vacation. So again, this, as Luciano Floridi called it, this idea that we are on life, not just online. So you might log out of your apps, but they don't log out of you.
No, that's for sure. Why does every vision of technology in the future have to be dystopian? I mean, if you look at where we are right now, I mean, every movie you watch, if we look at where we are right now, I don't think most of us would take a step backward. The technology provides us with opportunities to do things that we could never, our ancestors could never do. There are a few people, certainly, maybe some Republican Party people in the US that want to go back to the 1950s, but I'm not even sure that's related to the technological change as much as other things. So if it's not dystopian now, why does it have to be dystopian in the future?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I tend to think actually everyone is an optimist except me. So when I give these talks in person, and I'm sorry that I could not get to Singapore, but I'll be in Tokyo next week if anyone's around. So if you're, when I give these talks in person and I ask people, going back to those three perspectives, right? Hold your hand up if you're a techno dystopian, techno utopian, or techno instrumentalist. Almost always, most hands are in the middle. So they tend to think technology is just a means to our end. It's not good or bad.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is, the University of Twente, where I'm at, our motto is high-tech human touch. We don't even have a philosophy program anymore. We only are allowed to do philosophy of technology. I was recently told by my publisher, your next book better be about AI. We don't want anything else. So again, this idea that, we think about technology, technological progress as human progress, so that we no longer can even think about the two separately, right? So even if we do think about dystopia, it's not about how do we get rid of technology, period. It's usually how do we get rid of the bad technology. And the idea is typically, well, we have good technology versus bad technology. So as much as we might think the gun debate in America is ridiculous, you find tech companies reproducing it by basically saying, well, we'll fight bad algorithms with good algorithms. right? So bad guy with a gun, good guy with a gun. This is the tech company mindset that they're selling.
Yeah. I mean, I think we tend to like categorize things like that, and I look at it like if you consider like suffering as well. I would argue that stopping aging is probably not going to change suffering. And my understanding of the argument is that you can't stop. There's going to be suffering no matter what you do in life. And so you have to embrace it. And this may be simplistic view. You have to embrace it to get through life in a meaningful way rather than trying to avoid it. But I don't think that technology that makes us live healthy longer is likely to decrease the suffering or the happiness that much. So do those things have to be linked?
Well, I think the idea for me is more about what's motivating the pursuit of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the idea is, I accept the idea of the inevitability of suffering, that you cannot avoid it. I don't know if we, even when we say those things, I don't know how serious we are. So for example, the philosopher Martin Heidegger, another existential philosopher, talked about this idea that, we treat death as something like a misfortune that befalls other people. And we treat it as something that will happen far in the future, if at all, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about other people dying, and say like, when I'm old and gray, surrounded by my loved ones, and do not take seriously that you could actually die at any moment, right?
Yeah.
So I think something similar with suffering. We say like, oh, of course we know everyone has to suffer, but I still think we embrace technology in part because it does offer this fantasy of being free from suffering, and this is why. More and more children are crying. You hand them an iPad, they stop crying. And then you see the parent who handed them the iPad also has an iPad. So basically, everyone has a technological babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm about to go on this long flight to Japan tomorrow. And again, it's, how much technology can you pack in your suitcase in order to not have to experience the time of that you're going to be on the plane, right?
Yeah, that's what business class is, right? Just to avoid suffer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why economy class is made to suffer in more.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I don't perceive looking for healthy longevity in quite the same way. I don't want to get too personal. I had a serious car accident. I did everything but die. So maybe I went through a life experience that was different than most people. But, I'm not afraid of the travails of aging particularly, or dying particularly. But I do enjoy the life I have and the function I have. And so when I think of, technologies that are going to help me stay healthy longer, and I'm not quite ready to advocate cyborgian vision yet, but if I think of the technologies that make me healthy longer, it's to look at the positive side and enjoy life that I have as long as possible. So I don't know if that's a different view on it than the one you're talking about, or a different way of looking at the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I was in a car accident a year ago, and my son ever since has said like, don't talk about the D word, right? So he treats death as equivalent to swearing, right?
Yeah.
So again, this idea, I'm not saying death is great, can't wait, but instead this idea that treating death as not a part of life is the kind of thing I think Nietzsche was worried about, and the kind of thing that I embrace as well. This idea that once you try to separate out certain parts of life from others and say, well, let's get rid of the bad and only have the good, the idea that, well, that's not life anymore, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that you need to be able to embrace our bodily being, not try to avoid the body. That this is another part of the mind-body dualism I was talking about. This sort of, if only I didn't have this stupid body, I wouldn't have to worry about COVID, right? And you get this idea that, we were basically already in a technological quarantine long before COVID. And this is why people were so well prepared for something like a pandemic,
Yeah,
because
that's a
we
good
could
point.
easily embrace technological disembodiment already.
Yeah. Yeah, you humans did remarkably well in a lockdown, I think, compared to what they might have done 50 years ago. It's true.
Right.
I never thought of it quite that way. I can also report that many people have been talking about COVID and forgetting other viruses, but the cold virus is alive and healthy. I know because I'm suffering with one right now. So if I sneeze uncontrollably, that's why. I wanted to ask a question. I think you're going to know. I think I know what your answer would be, but I'm worried that it may not be the case. If we have technologies that come along, and I go to these conferences. I was just in Montenegro, where there were a lot of crypto people trying to solve world problems, including longevity. Very interesting conversations, by the way. But I think that a lot of those people would embrace all kinds of technologies to live longer. But the question I have is that whatever we do with these technologies, they should ultimately be optional. And is there going to come a time when, we have some, part robot, part human technology that makes people live longer and keeps them out of the hospital? Is there a point where that's no longer optional for the population? And I don't know what you think about that. So.
Yeah, well, this is certainly the worry of people like Kevin Warwick and Nick Bostrom, who I mentioned. And this is what Langdon Winner has termed cyber libertarianism. So this idea that part of the problem of technologies, if I had had more time, we could have gone more into this, but this idea that another aspect here is the degree to which it drives us towards individualism.
Yeah.
So this is also part of the problem with focusing on health and suffering, is the degree to which it's my health, my suffering, my longevity. And the willingness to basically say, if AI will make my life better, then I don't mind the giant data centers polluting the planet, because at least I get to live, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea that what Bostrom argued with these two freedoms, the morphological freedom, this idea of, well, shouldn't it be up to each individual person, right? What's interesting is at the same time, he then immediately moves to reproductive freedom, where you don't have a decision. It would be your parents' decision.
Mm-hmm.
And this would seem like a contradiction, but again, he's an Oxford professor, so he can't be contradicting himself. So I think the implication has to be that you just take for granted that your child would want this, so you're not doing anything wrong in doing it before they even come out, right? At the same time, I think there's this idea that needs to be discussed with ableism, right? That as soon as you start saying we can use technology to improve cognitive shortcomings, then you get this idea that there is a normal cognitive ability, and people who fall below it have something wrong with them, and they need to be fixed. So again, in the same way we talked about the deaf community, and this idea like, hey, we invented cochlear implants, we fixed you, and they're like, I wasn't broken, right?
Yeah,
I have a different experience, not an inferior experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about it, that it's really a balance, right? Because technology forces everyone into certain choices, and then some technologies are optional. And maybe that's Thoreau would argue that, I assume that, the power lines and the all of the things that have happened to Walden Pond, have not been a good thing, and he's forced to accept it because the world has become that way. So I guess that, that technology influences everybody, and yet some things are optional, and maybe there's a lot of thought that should be put into where that balance should be going forward, because it's only going to get more challenging, I suspect.
And Thoreau only got to live at Walden Pond because of his family's pencil factory fortune.
But that's also true. Yeah. I fished on Walden Pond, actually. There's a lot of perch there. So it's not totally destroyed yet.
Yeah. I'm from Massachusetts. Yeah.
Sorry, you're a bit choppy for there.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I think you're back. So we missed some of that. So.
Oh, I was just saying that I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm
Oh, really?
also yeah.
Yeah, I lived 10 years in Boston, so
Oh, right.
got to experience a fair bit. All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to bite. So instead of asking you whether AI is going to kill us, I think because I'm sure you're sick of that question. I think the concern really is that, as right now the AI is not going to kill us, but as it gets more maybe human-like, I guess, or cognitively capable in a way that we are, it may become dangerous, I suppose. So the question is, first of all, is there any way to stop this train anyway? And second of all, should we stop the train?
Yeah. Yeah, so I am worried that we're misunderstanding again going back to the technological mediation, just the very
Yeah.
idea, what does it mean to refer to something artificial as intelligent?
Yeah.
And how this shows that how technologies are again mediating our concepts. So our concept of intelligence becomes such that a machine could be intelligent. So rather than worrying about our AI becoming more like us, it's more that we're becoming like machines.
Yeah.
And so we think in terms of means to ends. We think in terms of tasks that need to be achieved. And we think that it means intelligence, that you're able to be as efficient and productive as possible. Shockingly, we're going to think, wow, machines are really intelligent. And in fact, they're going to be more intelligent than us and destroy us all. Now, at the same time, we've had the mechanical Turk problem for a long time, and AI, ChatGPT, whatever AI you want to talk about, there's, an army of unseen exploited laborers who are making it work. And their lives are being ruined, whether or not anyone else's life is being ruined. At the same time, the data centers, the carbon dioxide footprint required to build a large language model is equal to something like the lifetime of a car times 5.
Yeah.
So again, we like to think about mind-body dualism. We also think about virtual reality dualism. So the more we focus on VR, the less we think about the impact on reality.
Yeah.
But VR has a massive impact on reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, I am very worried about AI destroying the planet. But not because it's going to rise up and kill us, but because we're going to use it to kill ourselves.
Yeah, it's just another more powerful tool to do what we're already doing. Yeah. So I'm going to bring Weihan in here. There's some questions from the audience, and I've been talking too long already.
Thanks.
So thank you, Dr. Nolen, for your presentation. So I do see that there are a lot of questions from the audience. So the first question is, does post-phenomenology explain the technological imperative that drives people to use more high technologies as an end in itself, and driving healthcare costs up because new tend to be more expensive?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the problem actually with post-phenomenology is the degree to which it tries to be descriptive. So this idea that it's not trying to explain, it's trying to describe. So it's trying to say this is how the world works. This is how humans relate to technologies. This is why I introduced Peter Paul Verbeek in mediation theory, what he called the ethical turn in philosophy of technology. So moving from description to normative claims. And what I've tried to do is basically take that one step further and say, ethics isn't enough. We also need politics. So this is why I said, talking about climate change, thinking about capitalism, there has to be these kinds of concerns like the questioner is pointing at. But I do not agree, or I do not find in post-phenomenology the resources to deal with it alone. So I think a lot of people like myself tend to supplement post-phenomenology with a philosopher, I did with Nietzsche and now with Simone de Beauvoir. You can do it with Marx, you can do it with Foucault. It's sort of a choose your own adventure of which political philosopher you want to bring in.
Thank you. And the second question would be that medically, What are the examples of technology getting in the way?
I guess it depends on what you mean by getting in the way. But I tend to think, for example, we're developing. You've probably heard of these sort of robot companions for the elderly. I don't remember what they're called, but they look like seals, and you can hug them and they can communicate with you. And this idea that isn't it great that your grandparents have a robotic companion to keep them company? But again, this idea that that's basically means that I don't have to go visit, right? So that this gets in the way. We used to have, again, going back to this relationship with death question, we used to have older relatives living at home with you. And this helped to reinforce the idea of death as a part of life, because you literally had life and death in your house all the time. But now that we've sort of moved dying people off into separate facilities that I can visit when I choose, or I could only visit remotely by Zoom in order to save myself, right? So you can buy not only the robotic seal companion, they now have a picture frame that you can also buy for your grandparents that basically automatically does video calls. So you don't have to worry about teaching your grandparents technology. You can just buy it for them. So we have lots of things, like robotic arms that can feed people. These are things that I'm not saying aren't helpful, but they are also a way to make it so that I don't have to be the helpful one.
Yeah, the comment about the robotic companions reminds me of the movie Her, and I think that I don't know if you've seen that movie. I think that's one of the better futuristic movies. I think of that more when I think of the progression of AI, that ultimately it's not going to kill us, it's just going to get bored with us and go do something else. Anyway, Wei-Han.
Okay, thank you. For the third question is that, so people are now co-evolved with technology, but isn't the problem because people and technology have diverging goals? For example, tech companies want profits, but profits, unfortunately, is not linked to actually making our lives better. So could we then not just making profit directly depending on the results?
Yeah, I think, the philosopher Jacques Ellul, French sociologist writing in the 1950s, was already worried about this idea. I kind of hinted at it in passing, this idea that human progress, technological progress have become intertwined, such that technology isn't just a means to an end. It actually is shaping our ends, and that we cannot conceive how we would achieve any goal we have outside of technology. Even something like pure science doesn't exist anymore, because you can only do scientific research to the degree that you have technological means to carry it out, right? So last week I was at a festival, there was a debate about string theory. You had 2 Nobel Prize winners discussing it, but it all really comes down to just, have the engineers gotten us to where we need to experiment, yes or no?
Yeah.
And I think this is really the problem, is that we cannot even get any distance from technology in order to try to figure out, what's me and what's the technology. So my concern about technological mediation is this idea that precisely if everything we do is mediated by technology, then how could I ever say my goals differ from goals of technology? Because how do I even know where to draw the line?
But this all sounds, when you think about it, it sounds inevitable. How do we get out of this paradox?
Yeah, well, this is what Ellul was worried about. So Ellul thought there were 3 ways we could be saved. One, nuclear warfare, which would just destroy all technology on the planet.
All right, I'm looking at option 2 and 3 at this point.
Yeah, so 2 is the intervention of God. And then 3 was that we all wake up, realize that technology is making our lives worse, not better, that technologies don't serve us, we serve them. And we say, this isn't how life should be, and we do something else. So in the same way, we could all wake up tomorrow and say, let's not do capitalism anymore. We could all wake up tomorrow and say, let's also not do, inevitable progress of technology anymore.
I'm not holding my breath.
No, that's why Elo was a very Catholic thinker.
Way high.
All right, thank you. So the next question would be that, do you think the development of things like virtual reality or even metaverse will eventually change over time the perception of people about real world or even about the life and death itself?
Yeah, no, I think the metaverse, it doesn't exist and it's already changing how we do things. So you have massive amounts of money, not only from Zuckerberg, but from all the companies who want to buy virtual real estate in the metaverse. It's quite likely the metaverse will never happen. And yet the amount of time and money and energy that's already been poured into it has reshaped the world. So whether or not we're ever going to upload our consciousness as was hoped by the metaverse, the very idea that you could has reshaped what we think consciousness is, so that we think it's something that could be uploaded. So this is already having an impact on our lives.
Thank you. So for the next question would be that, so you think the technology and science to extend longevity will also imply that the elder population will be a part of the workforce for longer time than the current retirement time? So how people will perceive this change, and what culture or thinking change will need to be implemented into societies?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a good question, because I think, we saw these massive protests in France about changing the retirement age just to 64. And in America, the retirement age is death. So of course, the idea, wouldn't it be great if we could push death back so that you can work at Walmart as a greeter a little bit longer? I do think this is a real genuine concern, that if you have aging populations and you couple that with the climate change fears that drive you to not want to have children, then you're going to have something that allows older people to work longer. So this is where you could have concerns about longevity getting captured and repurposed by capitalist concerns. You get to live longer, that means you get to work longer.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways of looking at that, though. One is that when they instituted retirement, it was actually right around the time of life expectancy. So it was basically a tool to go home, or a means of go home and die. And sure, some people live 20 years longer, but it's a very small number of the population that got to enjoy retirement. And life expectancy has gone up a lot, not because so much aging research, but because of solving other problems mostly over that period. And now we expect a long period of retirement, and I do too. I'm a professor. I'll just die in my office, but I think people should expect that. So the problem is the demographic changes that are happening with childbirth and life expectancy are forcing people to work longer. The only thing that could change that is if we don't need people to work anymore, which some people believe is going to happen as well. And I don't know where that's going to go, but I feel like, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Right now we're already living longer, way longer than they expected when they instituted retirement. And that's causing, if people have a lot of health problems, that's causing economic burden. If those people are still healthy, they can work or they can not work and still contribute to the economy and not be a cost burden on the economy. So we almost have to do healthy longevity to deal with the retirement right now. So I think there's a two-way argument there to that. Maybe
it also raises an interesting question about divorce rates, and the idea that till death do us part was also when we thought you would die a lot faster. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's going to rechange thinking on a whole lot, and it already is rechanging thinking on things. If we really radically change lifespan, then it's going to have even more change. But it's not going to be sudden change. There aren't going to be 200-year-old people on Earth for at least 81 more years. Even if we stopped aging entirely, it's going to be a relatively gradual change in the demography. And so I think it's really hard to predict what the outcomes of that are. I would like to think that the good would outweigh the bad, but I think we just have to see. We're going to have to stop now. We have to bring you back again sometime to continue this discussion, because
Yeah,
there's a
sounds great.
large number of naive questions I haven't asked yet. But thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so please use the chat function and panelists and all attendees option to make comments about the show. This show is a little bit different. We can do more like this if you're interested, so let us know. Our center is constantly looking for new members. So if you're interested in doing research on aging and healthy longevity, with or without technology, let us know, and we may have options for you. We have 2 new papers that have been published in the Geroscience Journal recently. One of them, Don't Listen Nolen, is remote monitoring technologies for measuring cardiovascular function. I'm teasing. In community dwelling adults, a systematic review. And the other one is about our new clinical study, ABLE, which is AKG supplementation in middle-aged adults looking at biologic age. Both of the links can be found in the chat box. The next episode will be June 8th, where we'll have Jonathan Guy, who will be talking about exercise and neural recovery in the optic nerve. So I'll be with you next week, and I'm going to be coming very early in the morning from North Carolina. So if I'm grumpy, that's why. I'm going to leave you with a final video of a 91-year-old at Turnfest in Berlin in 2017. Thanks a lot.
I'm feeling like sunshine, like springtime, like something's in the water and I'm taking a deep dive. I'm feeling so weightless, like I'm gonna make it, and nothing in the universe can take this. I can see it clearly now, nothing gonna bring me down.